Ragnarok, Final Act. Execute Order 66. 4 words that irrevocably changed the galaxy. Until that order was given, there were very few people thought about the implications of the Republic having a clone army. Oh, the benefits were obvious and immense. The clones were at the peak of human performance, perhaps a bit beyond it. Every single one of them. With the exception of a few defective units, they always followed orders. Only the various commando subtypes had any latitude in that regard thanks to their increased independence. The existence of the clones meant that the Republic citizens didn't have to bury millions of their children. Billions even. It meant that when the Republic most needed it, it got an army to protect it. Their existence was too good to be true, and when Order 66 was given, that became a fact. There were few people who truly knew the details around the creation of the clone army. By the time of the Jedi coup was over, they were either dead on the run. We might never know the truth, though with the benefit of hindsight there are some conclusions that become obvious. The most popular theory, which is the one accepted by most post-war governments, is that the Sith were to blame for the creation of the clone army. Count Dooku and his Shadow Master, to be precise. The events at Corellia and later interrogation of thousands of clones who survived the battles across that system revealed some troubling facts. It wouldn't be stretched to conclude that Order 66 was the primary reason why they were created in the first place. Unfortunately, no one knew that during the first stage of the war. And even if they did, it wasn't like the Republic had any choice. As we all know, all the Army and Navy crew expansion programs implemented shortly after the start of the conflict gave fruit shortly after Order 66 was given. The sad truth is that the only people who likely had any inkling of what the clones might be capable of were the Sith who engineered their creation, the clone masters themselves, and the Jedi who had Count Dooku in their custody shortly before the coup. Unfortunately, they're all dead, and the little records that survived are contradictory. Those who wish to give the Jedi the benefit of the doubt claim that any information they got came from Dooku, a traitor and thus not something the Senate would believe. Further, they believed that the Republic was already under a Sith control, which made any legal recourse a moot point anyway. We all know the consequences. The Jedi coup. Attacks upon GAR High Command, the Senate, the assassination of Chancellor Palpatine, and strikes aimed at various critical facilities on Coruscant. Finally, the traitor's just reward, Chancellor Palpatine giving Order 66 with his dying breath. It is sad to think that the last actions of a man who spent his whole life in service of the Republic did more to end it than Dooku and his separatists. No one really knew what the clones would do to execute a contingency order, much less 66. It is widely believed that it was the reason they existed. It is known that their indoctrination and mental conditioning was especially heavy when Order 66 was concerned. In hindsight, the only surprising thing that happened at Corellia was the restraint shown by Admiral Felix and the rest of the clones. They could have bombarded the Green Jedi Temple the moment clones on the ground met resistance. Instead, they chose to take the place conventionally, which allowed a handful of Jedi and most of the youngest among the trainees to escape, while the rest, along all Coruscant personnel in the area, fought to cover their retreat. However, the Corellian diktat of that time didn't see it that way. All Shiloh Maricopa knew for sure was that the Republic betrayed Corellia and started an unprovoked war. Admiral Vulf Yularen was placed in even worse position. The Grand Army of the Republic, Saviors or Traitors. An Axis War College publication, 2nd edition. =RK=. Flagbridge. Republic Cruiser Hunter. Corellia. Diktat, please give me something to work with. Admiral Yularen implored. His words were met with a mask of cold indifference. He was running out of time too. Vulf had no idea how long the clones would tolerate his attempts to buy time. As if that wasn't bad enough, the Cis Navy was busy gutting what was left from the infrastructure in the system or assaulting the 2 words besides Corellia which could still put up a fight. Yularen was furious that his supposed subordinates were the ones preventing him from doing his duty and protecting the Republic. Instead, Vulf was forced to find excuse after excuse not to attack Corellia immediately. Maricopa's mask cracked. You betray our trust. You attack our people without proof or provocation, and you have the gall to demand that we hand our citizens to your mad attack dogs. Admiral Yularen, let me make this crystal clear. Any Republic vessel entering the exclusion zone around Corellia will be considered hostile and fired upon. The diktat's words came in a tone colder than liquid helium. Yularen wondered how much of that was her emotions speaking and how much was for the benefit of her own people. He knew from the beginning that talking with Maricope was a long shot at best. Wolf did it primarily in order to buy time because everything he knew about the Corellians led him to one irrefutable conclusions: they weren't going to back down. Doing so wouldn't just be a political suicide for the Diktat. It would be futile too. The Green Jedi were intermarried with all important Corellian noble houses and practically every single notable military family on the planet. They had been doing so for thousands of years, and by this time it was hard to see the distinction. This wasn't Coruscant where the Jedi kept themselves separate. Here on Corellia, the Green Jedi were Corellians. They were practically family with both Coruscant and the ruling classes. Giving them up would be all but impossible even if elements in the Diktat government were willing to do so. Doing so would create an unacceptable precedent, and that was even before one took into account the temperament of the average Corellian. What the clones did before Wolf's arrival was to repeatedly push all the buttons the locals had. The Corellians were fit to be tied, outraged and ready to fight. The CIS commander, Trench of all people, wasted no time in figuring out the gist of the situation and was running wild across the system. All that left Yularen in an untenable position. He turned his attention to the open channel with Coruscant. Palpatine was dead. The Senate and surrounding areas were still in chaos. Kenobi had just been taken out of surgery and put into a Bacta tank. He wouldn't be in position to do anything but float in there for hours, and that was the best-case scenario. Apparently it's been touch and go for the general. That left Wolf's and Corellia's last chance in the hands of the politicians. What do you mean you can't find him? Yularen glared at the clone admiral currently in charge of Coruscant. Communication lines with the surface are still being disrupted by worms in our systems. Ahmed's either gone to ground, kidnapped or dead. I've got people securing all government facilities and finding the most important Republic officials to keep them in one piece in case of further troubles. Yularen closed his eyes and cursed. Mas Ahmed, the vice chair, was supposed to briefly become the new chancellor if his predecessor died. However, in that case his powers were going to be limited, and his only real duty was to gather the Senate ASAP so they could vote in a new chancellor. The Republic bureaucracy and armed forces were supposed to continue doing their jobs while the politicians figured out who the next Supreme Chancellor was going to be. Under normal circumstances that wouldn't be particularly big problem. High Command ran the war mostly by itself anyway, and the bureaucracy was perfectly capable of operating for some time without a chancellor at the reins. The situation was anything but usual. Yularen needed time. Hours, probably days. The alternative was unthinkable. Admiral Grad, what is the status of the Jedi who launched the coup? Of the Jedi Temple and the Jedi Order on Coruscant? Wolf asked. He knew that his harebrained idea was very long shot. Unlikely to work. However, he had nothing else left. They went to ground. While the temple is currently being secured, most Jedi went away. I've blockaded Coruscant as well as I can, but I could use more assets in order to implement Order 66. The clone answered immediately. I'll see what I can do. Yularen over and out. Wolf cut the connection. He had an opening no matter how tiny. Now he needed just to convince the clones to stop being criffing maniacs. Yularen composed himself and opened channel to all Republic forces in the system. I've been apprised of the situation on Coruscant. The Jedi responsible for the coup went to ground. Admiral Grad needs more assets to hunt them down before they can get away. At this time all Jedi on Corellia are confined to the planet's surface. With the CIS fleet in system they won't escape. I'll be bringing this fleet back to Coruscant so we can execute Order 66 as intended. Any comments? Yularen asked. He looked around the bridge dreading the clones' reactions, then looked back at Felix's image. There were a lot of emotions crossing the man's face at an alarming rate. Yularen could clearly see that the clone was fighting to reach a decision. I can see the benefit behind your reasoning, sir. I can understand it. Felix ground his teeth and it looked like he struggled to speak. I'm still compelled to execute Order 66. We can't let the Jedi get away from Corellia. Are you men willing to remain behind and ensure no Jedi leaves Corellia without assaulting the planet? Wolf asked. Felix was technically relieved. The two clones after him in the chain of command were even worse, so despite his qualms, Yularen kept talking with the man. He was honestly afraid to know how the rest of the clones from Plo Koon's fleet felt about Order 66. Felix at least was willing to listen despite being an obstructionist crazy maniac. The clone blinked a few times as if struggling with the thought, then nodded. I believe so, sir. As long as the Jedi remain contained at Corellia, Felix answered. And why the Criff didn't you think to do so from the start instead of starting a Criffing war? Yularen wanted to scream that question aloud. He wanted to choke that idiot to death. Yet, the way Felix struggled with the very idea of not attacking Corellia immediately in order to get to the Jedi, the confused looks the clones on his bridge were giving him, that made him pause. There was something terribly wrong with the clones. Yularen needed to figure out what before he could trust them enough to lead them in combat. If he could ever trust them again. Wolf ordered his fleet to calculate the first leg of the journey to Coruscant and called Maricope. Dictat, I've reached an understanding with my men. Apparently the contingency orders are absolute. At this time no one with the rank to countermand them is in any state to do so. Yularen paused, praying that Maricope would play along. I see. The Dictat allowed Frosty. I'm bringing my fleet back to Coruscant to assist the hunt of the traitors there. Admiral Felix and his forces would remain behind to ensure no Jedi leaves Corellia. Hopefully he would either dissuade Trench from invading the last of the 5 brothers or would go down fighting when the Sith either went for him first or when he was compelled to engage them in order to ensure the Jedi wouldn't escape in the chaos. It was likely going to be a disaster anyway, but until someone back on Coruscant could uncrypt the unholy mess there wasn't anything else Wolf could do. He just prayed that Maricope could glean his reasoning and go along with it because otherwise they were all criffed. That. The Dictat trailed off. That would be acceptable for the time being. The exclusion zone stands in place. Understood. Admiral Felix, you're to ensure no Jedi leave Corellia. Do not enter the 2 light seconds zone. If a ship leaves Corellia you're to dispatch force to follow it up and check if there are Jedi on board. Yularen cut off the connection. There was just one more thing that he could do for Corellia, if Kuat decided to play ball and not just leave their biggest rival burn anyway. I need a line to Admiral Coburn at Kuat. Unless Kuat's government decided to spare a few of their heavy capital ships, there was virtually nothing stopping Trench from taking control of the whole Corellian system. The Sith apprentices. Jedi Temple. Corellia. The whole building shook to its foundations. The tremors, mere aftershocks from the battle above Coronet made it hard to remain standing, yet Jabo had little choice. A squad of Republic heavy troopers was pushing through the smoke and the sheer bulk of their armor combined with the exoskeleton built in it allowed them to largely ignore the floor trying to shake itself apart. The few remaining Core-Sec people weren't so lucky, they were on the ground, which while made them smaller targets cut their mobility to next to nothing. When the clones strode in down the corridor, that handicap proved fatal. Heavy blasters and assault cannons ripped to shreds everyone pinned in place. The flying plasma made the scorching heat turn into furnace and the air itself began to shimmer. Jabo soon found himself in untenable position. He was pinned in place trying to keep Eli safe, while the Force went completely insane and clawed at his mind. He could hear the tortured screams of a whole world through the bond he shared with his master. It proved too much. His muscles were screaming in agony, the air in his lungs was hot enough to choke on and to top it all, Jabo's concentration shattered like a pane of glass with the speeder flying through it. The Force giving him strength slipped through his fingers and the young apprentice faltered. A blaster bolt struck his sword arm and charred it into a useless pile of charred meat. Before Jabo could register the pain, more shots slammed into his chest and he tried to scream as his body burned. He heard a choked scream of rage. The air above him shimmered, tortured metal screamed and men howled in pain. Jabo blinked and he was looking up at Eli's tear-streaked eyes, which were 2 blazing embers. Another blink. Eli was hugging him and babbling. He felt tired. Hot. Oh, so hot. Eli was looking at him and gave him a wan smile. He blinked and a wave of heat washed over them. For a heartbeat Eli was framed by dancing flames which didn't touch her skin, making her look like an angel. An instant of agony. Eli screaming through the Force before her voice was lost among the chorus of a burning world. Only then blessed darkness fell and Jabo knew no more. Ashe equals. Sundari. Mandalore. Arya, get yourself together, Nina shouted. She's out of it, Dev snapped and hauled her over his shoulder. Where's our criffing backup? Cora asked after throwing his favorite vibro knife at a commando droid. It caught the clanker in the forehead before it could open fire. Busy counter-attacking. Nina grumbled. We're on our own until the second echelon gets here at 5. We won't last 5 minutes without her. Atin jabbed a finger at the closest thing they had to a sister. You better do it. Phi grumbled from his perch 100 stores above them. Clankers 2 o'clock. Platoon strength. SPs. Dev stashed his burden into the burned-out trunk of a cargo van, then checked the magazine of his grenade launcher. Huh? There was one iron grenade left, the rest were he. Nice. The demo expert waited for the machines to come a bit closer and opened fire. Behind him Arya stirred. Her eyes snapped open and she moaned. 2 blood tears streaked down her cheeks, painting her dust-covered face in red. So much power. Arya wheezed drunkenly. Her connection with her master was wide open and it felt like Vale was connected to the heart of the dark side itself. Arya could taste just an echo of that power and it was enough to make her feel invincible. She staggered to her feet and smiled. With the thought her newfound power was made manifest and thick arcs of lighting danced over her body. She finally looked around. Nina and the rest were trying to protect her. It was so heartening, yet so insulting. Arya didn't need help. With the power she now had, there wasn't a thing upon that world which could challenge her. Arya strode past the clones paying them no more attention. She could feel droids, hundreds of them, charging at their position. She smiled and raised her hands. The dark side obeyed and was made manifest. The sky above them tore into a whirlwind of cracking energy. Arya brought her hands down and lighting rained upon her enemies, tearing them piece by piece. It was too bad that those droids couldn't feel pain. Otherwise their screams would have made a nice additions to the chorus of damned souls she could hear howling as their world died and took them with it. This is awesome. Dev cheered. Can you teach me this trick? He asked hopefully. Arya turned her shining eyes upon the clone. Oh, him she liked. She smiled and decided to keep him. The fountain of power in Arya's mind suddenly dried up. The screams she so enjoyed became distant echoes carried upon the force. The sheer power drain of the continuing attack drove her to her knees before her concentration could shatter. The lighting storm vanished as suddenly as it began and for the first time in more than a month Sundari was quiet. Arya's eyes rolled and she collapsed in the sleep of the utterly exhausted. I guess we'll last more than 5 minutes now. Kor quipped. Dev, pick her up. We're displacing before someone calls artillery on RSS. Nina ordered. He looked at the devastation and was very glad Arya was on their side. And to think she was just the apprentice. Ashe equals. Part 7, Shattered Dream. The situation at Kuwait couldn't be more different than the debacle at Corellia if it tried. It had the notable exception of going on more or less according to plan for both sides too. The Confederacy threw a full-sector fleet at Kuwait under the command of Admiral Duoningo. A fleet that had been reinforced until its 3 task forces had 2,000 warships each. By anyone's reckoning, that was an incredible concentration of war-making potential. There were few systems in the galaxy which could stand up to such a firepower. As if to make things worse for the Republic, an hour after the battle began, a small Assis fleet arrived and headed straight for the vulnerable industry spread across the system. That maneuver should have been the death blow against the defenders, if the battle was happening anywhere else. Even in Coruscant with its potent defense fleet and scores of Golan stations would have been hard-pressed to fend off close to 7,000 ships. Kuwait was different. A Republic sector fleet was stationed there, almost 1,000 ships of all classes even if most of them were various escorts. Thus Admiral Coburn had a potent force of his own to use, yet it was far from enough to protect the industry of that vital star system. The real game-changer was Kuwait's own navy. For thousands of years, the Quati had been one of the, if not the premier shipbuilding hubs in the galaxy. For the past few hundred years, Kuwait was the primary military contractor for the Republic and many of the core worlds. The benefits were massive with the most notable one finally proving its worth. When Admiral Ningo came calling, there were 7 Mandata-class star dreadnoughts in service. While usually only 3 were part of Quat's defense fleet, they were all recalled home when it became clear that the Cis long-anticipated offensive would pierce deep into the core. In order to back up those behemoths, Kuwait had their older Procurator battle cruisers as well as a formidable number of Vinotters, not to mention a suitable number of escorts and fixed defenses. It wouldn't be a stretch to call Camino the best defended system in the galaxy. That explains why the Cis threw as much tonnage against it in what for all intents and purposes was a feint. In order to dismantle Corellia, Admiral Trench needed a free hand to act, which in turn meant that Kuwait's heavy capital ships needed to stay home. For 5 hours the whole system was set on fire while Coburn maneuvered task forces formed around either mandators or procurators in order to smash any concentration of CIS ships threatening Kuwait's industry. At the same time small battle groups made of half a dozen ships at most dueled all over the system as the Confederacy attempted to wreck as much new construction as they could. For 5 hours the heavens themselves were set on fire. Thousands of ships died on both sides and in the end both admirals achieved their primary objectives. Kuwait emerged from the offensive mostly unscratched. Merely 10% of his industry was damaged, with a similar number of new construction lost. Coburn's fleet was hurt badly, however the Confederacy paid in blood for each ship they managed to bring down. Admiral Ningo lost most of his fleet before he gave the retreat order. More than 5,000 Confederate ships wouldn't be going home. However, he succeeded too. During the critical phase of the battle for Corellia, there were no Kuwaiti capital ships flying to the rescue. =RK=, Flag Bridge. Republic cruiser without fear. Kuwait. When the war finally reached Kuwait, a lot of pretenses fell away and were replaced by one simple reality, Admiral Coburn thought. Kuwait drive yards, which were run and owned by the Kuwait family, were Kuwait. While the system was technically democracy, no one in their right minds had any illusions who really called the shots. That's why Coburn wasn't talking with an elected official. Not even one of the admirals who he worked with in order to protect the system. Instead, he was begging Inara Kuwait, Kuwait Drive Yard's principal director, for help. Admiral, I've just heard from sources at Corellia. Kuwait's hull bearing was severe. Her deep blue robes made her look like an apparition out of Legends in the holoprojector. Not a nice one. Your request is denied. Our fleet stays home to protect Kuwait against any enemy who means us harm, Inara declared. Coburn had to suppress a wince. Even if his fleet had been intact, he didn't dare bring it to Corellia. Yularen's report was chilling. There were obviously unknown details surrounding Order 66 as well as any other potential contingency orders which were chilling. It wasn't hard to reach the conclusion that currently there were no GAR elements which could be used reliably at Corellia. That left the various system defense fleets manned by regular people, and Kuwait was the one which could act decisively in this situation. You're going to let Corellia fall? Many might accuse you in letting corporate interests take priority over what's best for the Republic. Coburn tried. The Corellians would certainly scream so both in the Senate and in front of any reporter they could get their hands on. Am I? It was your people who made the Republic position at Corellia untenable, Admiral. I only do what I must in order to protect Kuwait against either separatist aggression or your clones going rogue. Until this situation is resolved to our satisfaction, our fleet remains in system. You'll be hearing from our senator at Coruscant too, Admiral. As far as Kuwait is concerned, today the Republic failed in its principal duty. Please make sure that there won't be a repeat performance. Kuwait cut off the transmission. Coburn slumped in his chair. He was furious, yet couldn't fully blame Inara either. The Admiral had no doubt that the primary factors guiding Kuwait's decision were corporate and political. In the best interests of Kuwait too. Every moment they delayed helping Corellia, their principal rival in the core worlds, got weaker. The price Kuwait could demand in the Senate in order to release their sorely needed fleets for offensive operations was going to be astronomical, and the Republic would have no choice but to pay it. If there was a Republic when the dust settled. All ships with moderate or heavier damage are to remain at Kuwait for repairs and to augment the system defense. Rear Admiral Zak is in charge. The rest of the GAR fleet is to form on the flagship. We're regrouping at Coruscant, Coburn ordered. So we could go figure out what in the name of the Maker we're going to do with the clones and the separatists, he didn't add aloud. Coruscant Blues? Jedi Temple. Coruscant. While the Clone Wars continued to rage across the galaxy, the situation on Coruscant began calming down. When the primary sources of jamming were removed from orbit, all military, law enforcement and emergency channels were swarmed by cries for help. Thousands of LUTs and assault shuttles descended from the heavens and landed at all important Republic facilities on the planet. Heavy armored clones charged out of their transports with a single mission in mind: restore order and ensure the security of vital installations and personnel at all cost. Most of the soldiers were met by confused if relieved citizens, especially among those in position to see the Senate and Jedi Temple, which were both burning. while the former was secured post-haste when the assassins responsible for the murder of the Chancellor fled. The situation at the later remained grim. Despite the best efforts of certain Jedi Masters, the evacuation of the Jedi Temple was anything but bloodless. Most clones stationed there turned out to possess unusually strong minds, which inevitably led to confrontations which soon erupted in all-out warfare. It wasn't until heavy reinforcements arrived that the building could be finally secured. The Jedi Masters and younglings vanished shortly after the troubles began, whisked away by their own allies. Most of them managed to leave Coruscant before the Republic Navy could properly blockade the capital, and many others succeeded in vanishing within the city planet's lower levels. Yet, nearly a third of the Jedi present at the temple when the coup began were less fortunate. A lot of them were confused, cut off and forced to fight overwhelming numbers. Then Order 66 came down. When a concerned Bail Organa arrived to check what in the name of everything unholy was happening, he certainly didn't expect to see Republic soldiers engaging Jedi. He didn't know it, yet his actions resembled those he would have taken in a different timeline, a couple of years later in the aftermath of a very different yet uncomfortably similar coup. Organa landed his aircar at one of the visitor platforms on the west of the temple and for a few seconds simply stared in confusion. A terrible accident, another separatist attack, that's what he feared when communications were suddenly cut. Seeing smoke raising from both the Senate and Jedi Temple all but confirmed those suspicions. However, the truth turned out to be much more bizarre and terrible. On his final approach, Bail followed in a flight of Republic gunships which were descending like a flock of avenging angels. He intended to request information once the immediate area was secured, yet any such thoughts flew away when he landed. There was a boy sprinting towards the landing pad. The lad was a teenager, certainly no older than 14 at best. He was dragging a crying girl by the hand and brandishing a lightsaber in jerky, desperate motions. A dart flew in front of the Padawan and disgorged a squad of clones who immediately opened fire on the Jedi. The same was happening behind the lad and he soon was gunned down. It was a miracle that no one hit the girl who curled next to her protector and appeared to go catatonic. The clones shouting at her to surrender didn't help things either. What the criff is happening? Organa snapped, shocked by what he just saw. Identify yourself. A trooper whirled around and pointed a heavy blaster at the Bail's face. Senator Organa from Alderaan. Explain yourself, soldier. Order 66 is in effect, sir. The Jedi attempted a coup. As far as we know, they managed to take out the Chancellor. We've got confirmation about multiple generals including Kenobi being wounded, and we've lost contact with our men stationed at the temple. We're here to neutralize the threat and restore order. The soldier paused. Hex, leader, on the senator. Keeping him in one piece is your only priority. The rest, form on me. We've got traitors to hunt. What about her? A clone asked and pointed at the little girl. She's a Jedi. A trooper grunted. She's obviously surrendering and thus following Order 66. Another shot back. I don't care. A Jedi's a Jedi. Another grunted. We're good soldiers and good soldiers follow orders. The sergeant who spoke with Organa interjected. I'll look after the kid. Bail butted in the conversation. He didn't like where a few of the clones were pushing the conversation. As you will, sir. Hex, the rest of your squad remains to keep an eye at the prisoner. Make sure she doesn't escape. The sergeant shrugged and jogged towards the temple. Are you sure about this, Senator? She's a Jedi and they just betrayed us all. Hex grumbled. She's just a kid. Organa glared at the soldier. A Jedi too. Hex shrugged. Your responsibility, sir. Bail glared at the soldiers and went to check up on the little girl. He needed to get her out of here and then figure out what was really happening. The very thought of the Jedi pulling off a coup, an obviously unsuccessful one at that. Organa's mind refused to accept it. RK equals. Gar Hospital. Undisclosed location. It was quiet at the hospital. The only sounds Satine could hear were the quiet beeps of the equipment and a few whispered conversations coming from the doctors who just got her husband out of surgery. Obi-Wan was going to live and was expected to make a full recovery, even if he was going to spend at least 24 hours stuck sedated within a Bacta tank. Bo, on the other hand, Satine shook with fury. Her sister was still under the knife and was expected to remain there for the rest of the day, if she was lucky. Bo died twice on the way to the hospital. If she survived the operation, Satine's sister was going to be crippled and relying on life support tech to continue living. The damage to her chest and spine was so much that the doctors would have to turn her into a cyborg if she was to live. The Duchess looked around in derision. There already was a clone company on the floor with the rest of its battalion securing the building. She was pretty sure there were more soldiers coming in, both Mandalorian and Republic. It was too little too late. None of them managed to keep either her husband or sister intact. Satine's hands fell to her belly where her child was growing. She shuddered with a very different emotion when she thought of suffering Beau's fate. Her child wouldn't have survived such a trauma, and it was only luck she didn't run into Windu herself. The Duchess was terrified of that prospect. Scared that her daughter might not be born. Of the world she might be born to. Satine looked at Obi-Wan, who was peacefully floating in the Bacta. Even after being repaired during the surgery, his wounds were gruesome. Her husband was lucky to be alive. It was unacceptable. The war needed to be over as soon as possible. It needed to be won in such terms as to ensure no one would dare threaten her loved ones again. For her daughter's sake, if nothing else. That simple thought put things in perspective for Satine. Mandalore needed the Republic in order to survive. Barring that, it needed an alliance that could keep her home safe for long enough to be fully self-sufficient military-wise. Satine's mind went to the implications of the coup, its inevitable fallout, and to whatever she would need to do to spin things in Mandalore's advantage. =RK= Republica 500. Coruscant. For once in her life, Padme Amidala missed all the excitement. It was embracing really, with no Senate meetings or really anything else of importance until the afternoon. She decided to sleep in. With communications jammed, there was no one to warn her of the coup or really whatever else was happening on Coruscant. That's why she slept in. C-3PO was busy recharging and there was no one else at hand to give her the news so she could do something to mitigate the madness gripping Coruscant. Not until it was too late anyway. Once the jamming was up and a message from Bail got through, Padme was suddenly awake and stunned. The news channels were going crazy, comm lines were in disarray, and the GAR was announcing martial law until they could restore order and ensure there would be no more fighting on Coruscant. Naturally, a furious Padme got clothed ASAP and went straight to the Senate, where she was barred entrance while the building was being secured by an even increasing number of soldiers. "What do you mean the Senate's sealed?" Padme exclaimed. "We're still sweeping the building for enemy combatants, wounded and any unpleasant surprises, ma'am," a harried-sounding lieutenant explained. "You might want to try at HQ. Someone there should have more information." The clone paused. "Max, the senator needs security detail, get on it." "I don't," Padme shot back. "Standing orders, ma'am. We're to ensure no more government officials are lost. You're getting a security detail and that's that. If you want to do something about it, you should go to HQ." Amidala fumed. Tried to go to her aircar before her minders arrived, though she was unsuccessful and found herself being driven to GAR HQ by a group of polite clones who paid no heed to her orders to leave her alone. They even had the gall to sound amused, the bastards. That's how Padme got a security detail as a consolation prize and a driver on her way to GAR HQ, where she wanted to get more information and to lose the clones if at all possible. "No can do, Senator." Another grumpy lieutenant met her at the doors. Well, a good distance from them, because the entrance was currently blocked by a pair of walkers and a small army of clones who were busy fortifying the place as if they expected the whole separatist army to drop for a visit. "What about my husband? Do you know if he's all right?" Padme pressed on. "Skywalker? He's in the brig." The lieutenant sighed. "He didn't have the good manners to resist. I would advise that you head home until we can finish securing Coruscant against the Jedi and the other traitors. Sergeant, please escort the senator home." "What do you mean?" Padme exclaimed. "Weren't you informed, Senator?" The officer proceeded to explain what little he did know. That's how a shell-shocked Padme ended up back at Republica 500 in the company of 5 clones who were very polite but firm in their request that she stay put and doesn't go out to get herself shot at, again. That was. For once Padme was at loss of words in her indignation. She hadn't seen eye to eye with Palpatine for years, but to think that he was dead, assassinated by the Jedi because he obviously supported the Sith in the face of Vail. Padme sat down on the couch in her living room and stared blankly through the window. She found it hard to believe what the clones told her. The very thought of the Jedi turning against the Republic was unthinkable. Yet, that wasn't how they saw it, was it? Padme shuddered. If it was true. If the Jedi went and murdered Sheev just because he worked with and supported Vale. What about her? It wasn't that long ago when that man proposed an alliance that ultimately might have made her the most powerful woman in the Republic if she and Anakin allied with him. If things had turned differently, would the Jedi have gone after her? Padme shook her head in sick fascination. How could things go so wrong so fast? She was afraid to even contemplate the political consequences of the coup. =RK=. Senator Mothma's home. Coruscant. Senator Mon Mothma sat in her darkened study and was afraid. The initial reports she could get pointed at one inescapable conclusion: the coup she tactically backed was less than successful. The only good news was that Palpatine apparently didn't survive. Mothma knew that the senators who offered direct help were already scrambling and leaving Coruscant, while those who weren't prudent enough to find a good reason to make themselves scarce earlier. That put her in an awkward position. Mothma didn't know if one of the people who orchestrated the coup and knew of her tactic support was going to be caught alive. She thought about running but dismissed that idea. If she had to, Mothma would fall on her sword in order to protect Chandrila. Thanks to her deal with the devil, there were a lot of new munitions and arms factories being constructed back home. If it came to that, the nucleus of resistance against tyranny was already being formed by Oni and Sib loyalists. However, if she was lucky, Mothma might yet make such a thing very much not needed. With Palpatine out of the picture, it was possible to get someone not corrupt confirmed as a Chancellor. The Republic might yet be saved from both itself and the Sith, something Mothma couldn't do while on the run. And if she had to fall on her sword, then she would die a martyr inspiring those who knew the truth. =RK=. Lower levels. Coruscant. Mas Omega was on the run. He's been doing so from the moment he got confirmation that Palpatine was dead. Omega was possibly the only one who really knew the depth and breadth of the blackmail material the Chancellor had gathered on everyone. Mas knew Palpatine better than anyone else too. He had no doubt that the Chancellor had placed more than one dead man switch as a final curfew to his enemies. The Republic was in for some very interesting times. Omega too, unless he managed to disappear before the files were released. After all, he featured in many of them. The Vice Chair of the Senate was too busy with his own thoughts to pay much attention to the people around him. People who looked quite scruffy and dangerous. People who were examining his expensive clothes with speculation in their minds. That's why being grabbed by the shoulders before a massive fist impacted in his gut came as such a rude and terrible surprise. Something hit his knee and Omega found himself falling to the ground. "Another rich boy coming down here for the thrill, eh?" a gruff voice growled. A spiked fist sunk in Mas' kidneys, then someone kicked him in the ribs hard enough to break them. 2 days later, the brutalized body of Mas Omega was found in the gutter by a clone patrol, which explained how the last man who could have possibly prevented the Republic spinning out of control was not available to do it in the first critical hours after the coup. Ultimately, Omega ended up hailed as a hero and another victim of the traitors, despite being posthumously implicated in corruption, trading influence and blackmail. The Confederacy Ascendant. Tresh Tilroth's residence. Raxulon City. Raxus Prime. The triumvirate which for all intents and purposes ran the Confederacy of Independent Systems got together for one of their frequent gatherings where they discussed the state of the galaxy and how to go forward. Usually all they really did at their meetings was to straighten some details and ensure they presented a united front to the rest of the council. Most of the really important discussions and decisions, at least as far as the war was concerned, were usually made at one of the beyond secure conference rooms at the primary military complex on the planet. Tresh and his 2 guests did precisely that early in the morning before retiring to the Neimoidians' residence for further discussion before meeting the rest of the council in the late afternoon. Sanhil and Cleo Vombra got their chosen poison following Ilroth's example and sat on comfortable armchairs next to a low table in the corner of the study. They were soon joined by their host after he made sure that the room was sealed and the built-in jammers running. Ilroth crashed on the soft couch, sipped his tea and looked at his colleagues. "Who wants to start?" Tresh asked. "Our latest military successes are going to be troublesome." Hill grunted. The tall being took a swing from his Corellian brandy and sighed. "One look at the maps and people would begin asking why haven't won yet." Tresh winced. He was the one to ask that precise question to their military leaders, which earned him a nasty tirade. At a first glance, the Confederacy currently controlled most of the galaxy. Since yesterday the Corellian system was under the firm control of Admiral Tresht, though his forces had been able to capture only one of the 5 brothers. There were battles raging all over 3 more, though Corellia itself was merely blockaded for the time being. Camino had not only fallen but utterly destroyed by Vale's forces. It still wasn't clear why or what exactly happened there. All living people in the Cis fleet were in need of medical attention thanks to various mental issues. They were all raving about hearing Camino scream as it died. The recording from automated systems and droid reports weren't enlightening. No matter the details, the burning of Camino was a huge boon for the Confederate propaganda. Or would have been if most people outside the Cis were willing to believe it on face value. By any reasonable standards, the offensives all across the galaxy were an unparalleled success. The Triumvirate put their trust in their new military commanders and they delivered. However, that success had the potential to turn into a two-edged sword. I can guarantee that our fellow council members would push for a swift end of the war, either military or diplomatic, Tresht agreed. That's just my. She won't get enough support for a peace to be a problem. Vombra dismissed that particular concern. Those pushing to carry on with the attacks right now would be the problem, both in the Council and Senate. The Confederate Senate was largely neutered. However, it was chock full with people supporting the war. Making them not scream for a continued offensive at this time was going to be troublesome. I know where they're coming from. Ilroth snorted. You two are all ready to order Tresk to jump at either Camino or deeper in the core too. Vombra grumbled. The cyborg was very grumpy since it became clear he hadn't run certain numbers which made the Confederacy's situation crystal clear. Yes, the offensive achieved a stunning success. The Jedi's unsuccessful coup, and wasn't that thought amusing, further crippled the Republic. Whatever caused Gar and Corellian units to shoot at each other was just the icing on the cake. By any reckoning, this was the ideal moment to push deeper in the core and end the war. There was just one tiny problem. The Confederacy simply couldn't. Once Tresk pointed it out, I ran the numbers. I've been doing it on the way here too. They don't lie. Vombra let out an electronic whine. We've used too much fuel and ammunition. Fleet losses are higher than estimated and we've got more than a sector fleet worth of Republic ships unaccounted for in sectors we supposedly control. Not higher than we could afford. Hill pointed out. True that, Tresht agreed. We can throw another 7. Perhaps 8,000 ships at Kuwait. However, doing so would strip our garrisons in the core and leave Fondor vulnerable. We lack logistic capacity to shift a significant number of ships from other theaters. It would be a mistake anyway. Vale's on the loose with a large fleet, Iriadu's still a major thorn in our side, and we're engaged all over the east side of the galaxy. 8,000 more ships might be enough to reduce Kuwait's industry. Hill mused. The Gar strategic reserve in the core remains intact. Even if we take out Kuwait, they might still be in position to reduce Fondor, in which case we're back at square one. Ilroth countered. It got back to those 3 systems, Kuwait, Corellia, and Fondor. They were the 3 largest industrial hubs in the galaxy. The places where capital ships could be built with ease. With Corellia neutralized, Fondor and Kuwait were the targets both sides had to protect and neutralize in order to win the war. Each of those systems alone accounted for at least 50% of the capital ship production for their respective factions. If both were lost, the Republic would have a slight edge in cruiser production while the Cis would remain ahead in its capacity to build escorts. It was tempting to throw everything at Kuwait. If everything went right, such a gamble could be a war winner. If it failed, a counterstrike at Fondor would spell disaster. What will we recommend? Ilroth asked. We need to build up our logistics. Fortify our gains in the core, build more FOBs and supply depots. Secure the control we've got over most of the galaxy before the enemy comes knocking, Vombra said. The Republic needs to kick us out of the core. We can wait for our next major construction cycle to finish and end the war when our new fleets are ready. Hill added. Meanwhile we can see how much political trouble we can stir in the Republic. We're in an agreement then. Ilroth smiled and raised his cup in a toast. To victory. Victory. The rest of the Triumvirate chorused. The galaxy was within reach and soon would be in their grasp. == Part 10, The Twilight of the Jedi, passenger area. Republic transport swift. Hyperspace. Master Yaddle watched like a bird of prey over the younglings. She managed to get away from Coruscant. Officially, she and a few Jedi Knights who were with her were teachers on a school trip with their charges. They had all the documents claiming so in order, with a few loyal SIP agents back at the capital ready to confirm it if anyone bothered to do in-depth check. The ancient Jedi was glad she succeeded in saving as many of the younglings as she did. In the same time, her heart tore at the thought of those who were left behind. All she knew for sure was that about half of the Jedi who were at the temple when the coup went down managed to get away from the building itself. How many reached the transports waiting to spirit them away or found alternative means of leaving Coruscant, she didn't know. Yaddle smiled at the younglings. They were the future. Not of the Order, because as far as she was concerned, it was death. The Sith, the Jedi themselves, they were all to blame. They got complacent. Blind. Arrogant. It was hard to admit it to herself. It was easy to blame the Sith, Sidious, Vale, and Dooku. It was easy to resent the Senate for not listening. To hate the galaxy for letting the Jedi fail. Yaddle couldn't afford to continue with such self-delusions. The younglings counted on her to keep them safe. To train them as proper Jedi. To do that, she had to be brutally honest to herself. The Sith evolved while the Jedi stagnated. The Jedi had to change too, otherwise the blood of the younglings in her care would be on her hands. =RK=. Mon Calamari Star Cruiser Liberty. Hyperspace. Kit Fisto frowned at a small pile of knocked-out clones. Beside him, one Gyal Akbar, the ship's captain, and the Mon Calamari prince were looking between the Jedi and the Republic soldiers with confusion. "What's Order 66? Li Chao finally asked and sheathed his sonic blaster. "I'll be asking them when they're awake." Fisto grumbled. "They'll be awakening in the brig." Akbar sounded far from amused. "I want a marine detail to the bridge." "What about the other clones?" "There's 2 companies worth of them on board." "I'll go have a friendly chat with them too." Fisto smiled grimly. "Not alone." The prince shook his head. "Certainly not. I'll be sending as many Marines as we can spare, Master Jedi," Akbar agreed. "That might be for the best." Fisto nodded and looked back at the clones. He knew every single one of them. They had been fighting beside him for months now. They were his friends. What in the name of the Force was happening? Wasn't it bad enough that hundreds of Jedi died in the last few hours? =RK=. "What do you mean treason?" Fisto exclaimed. The rest of the clones on board were disarmed, most stunned thanks to liberal use of concussion grenades and sonic blasters. Those who still had their wits with them were being asked some pointed questions and weren't particularly shy in answering. Order 66. It was meant to neutralize all Jedi in case of treason. By refusing to surrender without a damn good explanation, Fisto apparently marked himself for death in the eyes of the clones. The Jedi was at loss at the sheer insanity of the idea. The Jedi betraying the Republic? Just what in the name of the Dark Waters possessed the clones to believe in such madness? What about those who gave the order in the first place? Fisto needed information. However, first the Liberty had to reach friendly space, and that was going to be problematic. They were still dodging separatist patrols, then there was Hutt space to contend with. =RK=. Lower levels. Coruscant. "I don't think we'll be getting out that way, Master." Sarah Keto glowered at the secluded hangar where their way out of Coruscant waited. Her master put a placating hand on her shoulder. "Calm down, Sarah. We'll figure something out." Chindrai Lag's voice sounded as if he had no care in the world. "Calm down? There's a small army waiting for us down there." "Down there? Not up here. So we're going to calmly turn around, smile and get away. Then we'll figure out a place to lay low and plan what to do." Shin shrugged. "What about?" Sarah trailed off and looked around. "We'll need to get the cargo to our clients ASAP, or there might be penalties. So we'll need to find a fast freighter or something." Sarah grimaced, but nodded. They were obviously going to play the role of merchants or smugglers with cargo that needed to reach their clients, somewhere that was far away from Coruscant. Keto looked at the dark street and all the gloomy-looking beings minding their own business. If she hadn't met her master on her way out of the temple with a pack full with holocrons, Sarah wasn't sure what she would have done. Neither her Padawan training, nor her missions with her master or even the war truly prepared her to survive on her own without help from either the Jedi Order or the Republic. It was unpleasant to admit it, but she would have been lost if Chin didn't find her. =RK=. Sib safe house. Coruscant. Two crippled men were hiding in off-the-books apartment on the other side of Coruscant from the Senate. The suburb was a very ordinary and serene place, not a location one would expect to find a disgraced Jedi and a Sith Lord. If they weren't on the run from practically everyone, Dooku would have been highly amused. Mace Windu of all people was stuck here with him, and the way the man felt in the Force meant only one thing: the former Jedi Master was falling to the dark side. That might prove quite useful. Or dangerous. Windu had always been quite insufferable as a Jedi. The Count only hoped that a close connection with the dark side would make the man easier to be around. That or drive him around the bend, which would be problematic. Without hands, Dooku was at a significant disadvantage. Not to mention that being stuck in the small apartment waiting for their contact to procure a few prosthetic and way off Coruscant was proving highly unpleasant. On the bright side, Sidious was very dead. Dooku felt his master perish through the Force. Windu confirmed it. Even better, Order 66 was in effect and the Jedi were on the run, thus the Count not only had his vengeance but also a reasonable chance to get away. After months of captivity, things were finally beginning to look up. =RK=. Abandoned basement. Sidra City. Malastere. Ki-Adi-Mundi contemplated his situation. He didn't like it at all. 3 days ago, his soldiers suddenly attempted to arrest him in the middle of a firefight. As if that wasn't enough, apparently one of the clones had different idea and simply opened fire. Only the shields built in Mundi's armor saved his life. In the ensuing battle, he had to cut down half a platoon before managing to break contact and vanishing in the war-torn city. That's how the Jedi Master found himself in the basement under an abandoned food store while the Republic and Sith forces were busy fighting for control of the planet. He had to dodge both sides for long enough to get to safety, whatever that meant nowadays, and then contact the Order so this mistake could be straightened out. After all, he certainly never betrayed the Republic. However, first Adi-Mundi needed to find a way off-world. He wondered which would be easier, trying to snag a Separatist transport or a Republic one? =RK=. Part 11, The Last Lord of the Sith. Observation Lounge. Corellian Cruiser Freedom. Hyperspace. The chaotic light of hyperspace was the only thing that could be seen from the former Bridge of the Freedom. As a part of her refit, she had outfitted with a proper CIC before we left to deal with Crimson just a few short months ago. It's strange how long ago that feels. The galaxy is a different place nowadays. The Republic is reeling from repeated blows. The Corellian system had fallen. The Jedi went on the deep end in their hatred of anything Sith, the criffing hypocrites. Palpatine was dead. My former master was either finally dead or the next best thing, because I couldn't sense Sash either. The Jedi were being hunted down like the rabid dogs they are. Kamino was a dead, cursed world just like Malakavi. I would love to say that I planned it all, that I caused all that chaos. Yet, Kamino's the only thing I could take credit for. All the rest's nothing more than unintended consequences. At least I got the war I needed. With the Jedi and so-called Sith of this era broken, I was finally free to act as I saw fit. The events of the last few weeks were a great boon for me. Or would have been if it wasn't for a few not-so-tiny problems. Sooner or later I would need to explain why Kamino was destroyed by a fleet under my command. I already had a few versions of events hashed out with Joanna and Wilharth. It remained to be seen which one would serve me best. Then there was the clock I was on. My time was running out fast. We would soon arrive on Belsavis and the future would be shaped by what we would find there. If the mother machine was still operational, I could restore my body. Otherwise, I would be forced to possess Shark T, who was still kept under sedation in the brig. In that case, I would have to discard most of my current goals and play a long game of conquest and subversion against both the Republic and Confederacy. Yet, I still could get lucky, in which case my primary problem would be explaining the destruction of Kamino. With the whole fleet being mine body and soul, I had good odds of blaming it all on the Sith and their pet Jedi disrupting my battle meditation to disastrous effect. There were a few other contingencies we planned too. Those were all practical considerations. Planning for the future. Plotting. It kept me from thinking about Bo. I couldn't sense her. Barring a miracle, my wife was dead. Murdered. Again. It was tempting to throw away my goals. Lately I found it hard to particularly care about them. What I wanted was to see the galaxy burn. To make it suffer just as I did. To hunt the Jedi and see every last one of them die screaming. I could sense Joanna's delicious distress, which brought my mind back to the present. We were the only occupants of the observation lounge, sitting on a table next to the windows. My admiral continued to both loathe and be almost bestowed with me. Breaking her along with everyone else in the fleet did what I needed it. They were all mine, yet retained most of their personality and all their skills. However, after shattering someone's mind and then putting it back together, there were consequences which went both ways in this case. Joanna Holt was blind to the Force. Yet, there was a weak connection formed between us. I didn't need to be in her presence to sense her emotions. What I did to her, it made the little piece of the man I was before becoming a Sith loathe me for it. Made me pity her. Yet, in the same situation I would have done it again without second thoughts. I don't need your pity. Joanna glared at me. Ah, yes. The other downside of my stunt, if she was nearby and I wasn't shielding myself, Joanna could feel my emotions too. Being pitied infuriates you. I looked at her eyes, who stared back defiantly. Anger, need, fear, she felt it all at once and I was the heart of those emotions. I stood up and went to Joanna, then cupped her cheek in my hand. She leaned in the touch and sighed in content. Shook in revulsion. Moaned in pleasure. You broke me. Joanna whimpered. I need you. She whined. I hate you. The Admiral growled. Make the pain go away. I wish I knew how, I sighed. Experiencing the roller coaster of her emotions wasn't fun even if I could use them to fuel my powers. Need. Hatred. Adoration. I feel your pain, Joanna sighed. And I yours. Losing Bo just as I fell in love with her. What was I supposed to do now? Why did I fight for a nation which was never mine, for people who aren't my own? Even the Mandalorians, the closest people to temperament and culture to what I would call mine, weren't really my own. Why did I care about the Vong turning this galaxy into hell? So that I might be able to return to a woman I once loved? Natal was in a different reality. She would loathe the man I chose to become all those years ago on Korriban. Joanna startled me when she pulled me into a hug. I could hear you, you know. She muttered. You aren't alone. If you believe you have nothing left, you're wrong. Know this, we will be with you until our last breath, every single man and woman in this fleet. We are your people, Del-Qatar. I could hear the truth ringing in her words. Joanna hated herself for admitting it aloud, yet that truth set her free. Yes, you are. A small smile tugged my lips. Not long ago you asked me why I fought. Joanna looked me in the eyes. For my people. For my family and home. And now for you, General. You have a home. A place to belong. It's with us. We will fight for you, no matter the odds. No matter the enemy. Will you fight for us? Joanna looked up at me with hope shining in her eyes.